Donald Trump has said that he's going to protect women, whether we like it or not, or whether we ask for it or want it. Okay, there's at least one way he could protect women. He could tell Congress to pass the joint resolution and to make the ERA the 28th Amendment to our Constitution. Is it outrageous to think that we could maybe change our attack and say, okay, instead of this being President Biden's legacy, let the first act of your presidency, Mr. Trump, be the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment? Is there any hope that we could persuade President-elect Donald Trump to do that? Okay, let's roll. Hello and welcome to Just the Facts with me, Jill Wine-Banks, the Watergate Girl. Please subscribe so you don't miss any episodes and write to me with any ideas you have for people you would like me to talk to in future shows. Today, I have a great guest to talk to about the Equal Rights Amendment. For anyone who follows me on social media or has listened to me on Sisters-in-Law, hashtag Sisters-in-Law, you know I am a passionate supporter of the Equal Rights Amendment. I've worked for it to become part of our Constitution since 1976. And I'm still waiting. But today's guest is working diligently to get the job done. She is Carolyn Maloney, who for more than 3 decades was a member of the U.S. House from New York, where she served as the first woman to chair the Oversight Committee. She is now at the Eleanor Roosevelt Distinguished Leader in Residence at the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute at Hunter College. She is the founder of ERA Now and is a former chair and of the state chapter of the National Organization for Women, which, as I said to you, Carolyn, is the thing I remember about the beginning of feminist action groups. You're also a managing director of the Metropolitan Opera, which I love, and an advisory board member for the Smithsonian National Women's History Museum. So you're quite busy. But I want to start because most important to me and to this show is your current position. You are focusing at Hunter on women's rights and the ERA. And so you're the perfect person to talk to about where we are with the Equal Rights Amendment, why we need the Equal Rights Amendment, why now, and what is the best means to that end. And there is some difference of opinion between the Illinois ERA Coalition and the feminist majority. And so I want to start with that. But before we get to that, just quickly tell our viewers and listeners, because some people will listen and not watch the YouTube part, how did you get involved in politics and the ERA? You entered Congress in 1993.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having your show. And given the recent election, I think the podcast is going to be more important than ever. And I am thrilled to be talking to you today. I've been an admirer of yours since you were a Watergate girl with the Watergate hearings. And that's the type of hearings we need right now, fair and honest hearings. And I'm afraid we're not going to get them in this next administration.
No.
So thank you for having me. I just will answer your question by saying I never intended to go to Congress. I was born in the conservative South, and women had small ambitions. I thought my choices were a nurse or a teacher or a librarian. Those were my role models, and I became a teacher. And the program, to make it a short story, the program lost its funding. My first election, I was teaching in Harlem, East Harlem, and they elected who would go to the Central Board of Ed to combat and restore the money. I was elected. That was my first election. We went up to Washington. Everybody was very depressed. They didn't get in to see everyone. I got in to see all of my 10 legislators, had a plan of action. I quit my job. I became the lobbyist for the program. We restored the funding, and I could see the power of government. Literally, a legislator who cared about legislation had more power on funding and setting standards than the chancellor. I had the chancellor calling me every day. What's happening in Albany, in the state capitol? So I quit my job. They doubled my salary and put me in charge of community affairs for adult education. But I had seen the power of government. I could see that government could do so much to help people. And I truly believe Elective office is the best profession if it's
Yeah.
done honestly and with great commitment. You can help the most people. So I went
That,
to work for the state legislature, worked for two speakers and the Democratic leader of the state Senate, ran for the city council and won, ran for Congress and won, and here I am now at Roosevelt House. I tell everybody I haven't gone very far in my life. I'm still a teacher, and I'm still pushing the Equal Rights Amendment. I did pass over 80 bills, 13 of which had presidential bill signings reserved for consequential legislation, but I could never get over the finish line for the ERA. So that's what I'm working on full time now. I helped found the ERA Coalition, and I'm working now with my own not for profit, working full time, trying to get the Equal Rights Amendment in the Constitution. It could not be more important. I will tell you that I never thought in my wildest dreams that my daughters would have less rights than I had at their age. It's really astonishing. And believe me, if they can roll back a woman's right to choose, they can roll back any other right. So the only way to protect women is to get them in the Constitution where they belong. And that is why the
yes.
Equal Rights Amendment is so important. So they cannot roll back our hard-won rights in education, in healthcare, and you name it. Title VII, Title IX, equality of treatment in sports and in employment, you name it. So it's a very serious time. And we have a few weeks left in the Biden administration. Let's try to do it.
I am so with you, and I am inspired by your story. And I also think we must be related deep down because your story reflects mine. I did not ever intend to practice law. I went to law school because there was so much discrimination against women in journalism, my undergraduate degree, that I decided that I could get a better journalism job if I was a lawyer. It took me 50 years to make that switch back to journalism, but anyway, here I am, and there you are. And let's just briefly review what the ERA says and what it would do. So I can read the exact language. I'm sure you have it memorized, but it's only two sentences. It says, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. So what's so scary about those two sentences? What is the problem? Why hasn't it become the law of the land?
Well, it is the law of the land in every Western constitution. It's everywhere except for in the United States of America. And there is a resentment or a deep feeling that wants to keep women down and back in America. I don't understand it. I was very successful in passing legislation, and I was the first woman to represent my district in Congress and the city council, the first to chair the Joint Economic Committee and also the Committee on Oversight. And I authored and passed a ton of legislation, but the hardest legislation I ever worked on was anything to help women. One of my first bills I put in was paid leave for the birth of a child, paid leave for sick leave. I finally passed it at the very end by attaching it to the defense budget, a must-pass bill. That's the only way I could get it through. But there's a tremendous pushback on anything to help women. I will tell you that all of my legislation, and I passed the Women's Museum on the Mall. I thought that would be a way to bring women on the Republican and Democratic men, and like-minded men together. I thought there wasn't a museum on the Mall. There wasn't anyone in the entire United States. So how do you empower women if you don't even recognize what they've done?
Right.
But even to pass that took me 20 years. I mean, it was an amazing pushback for anything that empowered or helped women.
That is such a sad story, and it is so true and so reflective of everyone who is listening here, who is female, of our story. Do you think the ERA would be just a symbolic gesture? And I'm not belittling symbolic gestures that would make women part of the real Constitution, but would it really help achieve equality in America? Would it help overturn Dobbs? for example, and I'll go through some other possible things that it might affect. But what do you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. My entire life, we've always worked on legislation for equal pay for equal work. But without the Equal Rights Amendment that ends discrimination against women, obviously you're being discriminated against if you're being paid less. In the 30 years I was in Congress, I did a report every year on pay discrimination. It hasn't budged. There's a 20% unexplained gap between men and women. And over the lifetime of a woman, it is roughly $500,000 to $1 million or more, depending what she's paid. Basically, the Equal Rights Amendment would allow you to enforce equal pay for equal work, because without it, the court is interpreting that you can discriminate against women. It was the 14th Amendment that was used to expand women's rights in the 70s, and it was overturned with Dobbs. And it's just the beginning. If we don't stop this erosion, they'll keep coming and rolling back other rights. But the Scalia doctrine came out, and that's what Aaliyah was writing about. He was saying he was originalist. He went back to the original Constitution and what it was like, and that the 14th Amendment was for the enslaved people, and it wasn't for women, and it didn't apply. Well, all of the women's rights advances were based on the 14th Amendment. With this decision, they are erasing that, which means that they can erase those laws that we put in place against discrimination. I can remember when I first went to work, harassment was part of the job. There was no laws to protect women. All of those laws were done based on the 14th Amendment. So this is a very serious time because they can roll them back. And I would say that our rights, or no rights, should be dependent on who's in office, who's on the Supreme Court. It should be basic in the Constitution as men's rights are.
So there has been some progress, because when I graduated law school, women earned 59 cents for every dollar that a man earned. And we're now about, 81 or 82 cents on the dollar?
Roughly 80 cents to the dollar.
80 cents. So we've made a little progress, but we should be at 100%.
It's still unfair. And if you look at a lifetime of earnings, it's really discriminatory and painful.
It's horrible. It's horrible. And when you mentioned the 14th Amendment, Michelle Goodwin, who I know you know, has made a very, very persuasive argument about why women really are part of the 14th Amendment. But let's not go there. I really want to go to some of the other things. I've read some of the things
the Supreme Court disagrees.
Yes,
the court used to be our friend. This is not our friend. Anything that goes to the court, we're in trouble.
We are. And besides Dobbs, you mentioned in some of the things you've written, a pink tax that could be helped by this. And I honestly never heard of a pink tax. So tell me what that is and how the ERA will help.
Well, the pink tax, the ERA will basically say you cannot discriminate against women. And in healthcare, the most important part, in my opinion, of the Obamacare is that men and women are treated equally in their insurance. We used to be charged way, way more, and insurance companies oftentimes would not cover pregnant women. They would absolutely turn them down. They'd come to my office trying to get insurance or to force insurance companies to cover it. But the pink tax is that they would charge more for women's goods than men's goods. Yeah. The very famous one is there was a blue train that was, like $100, but the pink train was $200. And so I even did a report once on the pink tax and toiletries and when you have the dry cleaning
and the dry cleaning is outrageous. Yeah,
the difference of a shirt for a man is much less than what they charge a woman. So basically that you had to treat them fairly in cost. Yeah. And so there has been improvement in that area because there's a big spotlight on it. But there are many, many ways where women are discriminated against. And I used to do this study called A New Look at the Glass Ceiling. And it looked at that the pay for men and women. And if we just paid women equally, we would move so many women out of poverty, literally out of poverty. It would help in so many ways. But it just showed that will enter the workforce because of work from you and other lawyers and the labor movement and women's groups will enter at the same pay. So the man and the woman enter at the same pay because everybody's looking at it. But 5 years out, when you start getting promotions, there is the gap continues. And even under times of increased economic growth, the gap still gets more. And so I looked at 10 different areas that women work at, and it showed that when you got 5 years out, the discrimination was there and moving forward. So it's just a way of enforcing equal pay for equal work and enforcing rights for women. The Morrison decision struck down the right to sue under the Violence Against Women Act for sexual violence. And in that particular case, the woman was gang raped, and it was not a question of he said, she said. People saw it. One of the men confessed. It went to the school. The school did nothing. Went to the city council, nothing. The state legislature, nothing. Goes to the Supreme Court, and they throw it out, even though all the facts show she was absolutely raped. They throw it out because women are not in the Constitution. So, I mean, I think if we could just get the Equal Rights Amendment in the Constitution, it would do more to end sexual violence than anything, because you could then move to try to get civil protection and support. So it's very, very important, but we need to get it done.
Let's talk about, in the language of the amendment, it says on the basis of sex. And that's been a very controversial, much discussed issue, whether it should say gender or sex. Is there a difference? What does it mean? Why was the word sex used on the basis of sex?
Well, they were looking at the civil rights laws, and they all said sex. And sex is based on who you are when you are born. So if your birth certificate says you are a woman, you are a woman. If your birth certificate says you are a man, you are a man. Gender is open to interpretation and other things.
Okay. And the ABA has finally come out in strong support of the ERA. Yay for them. I am very happy about that. But it was first proposed 101 years ago. It was 1923. It was right after the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote. And it sort of stalled and, hung around. In 1972, which is still a long time ago, we're talking more than 50 years, Congress proposed that it become the law of the land, that it become an amendment. And it had overwhelming bipartisan support in 1972. President Nixon, my favorite president, was a supporter. Gerald Ford and his wife were strong supporters. And this was a year before I became a Watergate prosecutor. It was after I had already graduated law school, which, by the way, when you said there were no laws, there was no EEOC. In interviews, I'd be asked, what kind of birth control do you use? How many children are you going to have? Oh, we can't hire you because you'd have to travel on this job and everybody else is a man and we can't let you travel with a man. They said this to my face. So you can imagine.
And they used to have advertisements, jobs for women, jobs for men, remember?
The classified ads classified ad, all said male, female, and you couldn't apply if you weren't in the right category. So obviously, I think it's really important. I don't understand the opposition. I mean, believe me, I followed Phyllis Schlafly, who is single-handedly, I should point out, in the first year after Congress put it out to the states, 30 states ratified it. That we only needed 8 more to make it an amendment to the Constitution. So in 1973, there were 30 states. And then the right-wing opposition, the religious right, got busy. Phyllis Schlafly became the spokesperson and killed it. And as I remember, the arguments were, women would have to share bathrooms with men. Women would be drafted. Women would have to pay alimony. And those were the reasons why it was opposed. What is going on now when all of those things are already a reality anyway? Why is there still opposition?
As I said, I think some people want to keep women down and back. but it
Well,
was introduced by Alice Paul, who was a relative of my late husband, Cliff Maloney.
really?
She was the first cousin of his grandmother, Florence
Oh,
Paul, who was a
wow.
traditional Quaker wife and mother. And then Alice, of course, was being force fed and put in jail and all of this
Yeah.
other things. So
I
that's
have to
another
stop you,
reason.
Carolyn.
Oh,
I'm
you got it in jail. You
my
got the
my
jail.
my.
That, that
I'm known for the hashtag Jill's pin, and today's pin is exactly that. And I just saw Suffs in New York,
wasn't it great.
which it's great, and it's supposed to inspire you to continue action. It made me cry. It made me cry because why are we still fighting the same fight? But anyway, go ahead. That's so fascinating that you're related to her.
Well, as I said, the opposition is deep and strong, and I think we have to work harder to make it happen. We cannot give up. We have to keep, and I think we will succeed because the obstacles that we face are far less than what they faced. They literally put Alice Paul into an
Yeah.
insane asylum
Yes.
and had her committed. And now I've been arrested at several demonstrations for women's rights, but we just get arrested and then they let us go. The
Wow.
suffragists, they literally put them in prison and they had to go on, all kinds of strikes, on food strikes and everything else to win. But one of my favorite quotes of the women's movement is they got this psychiatrist, and President Wilson, was trying to get her permanently committed. I mean, this was serious. She was in jail, and then they moved her into an insane asylum. And the doctor said, unfortunately, women of courage are often misdiagnosed
Oh,
as insane.
wow.
So so I think we are not being put in insane asylums and we are not really being thrown in prison. So we have got to succeed. We can continue our work, continue our advocacy. And that's why your show is so important. And one way people can help is that when I came to Roosevelt House, I decided I'm just going to work on the Equal Rights Amendment.
Yeah.
So I started a petition drive called Sign the Letter for ERA.org. It's not an ordinary petition. We are dividing it out by congressional districts so can show electeds how many of their constituents are urging them to speak out for women's equality. Leader Schumer was the first person to sign the petition, and he followed up with a hearing and a vote where we got 53 votes in the Senate. He is ready to vote on it again. They invoked the filibuster, so he did a procedural move so that we can go back. But in the hearings, their only complaint, so that you know, they say that there was a time limit that was attached to it, which is true. And then we extended the time limit, and that it was 40 years ago, and that you don't know where people stand. So we have legislation now in front of the House and the Senate. It is the same bill. In the House, we have to move it first. So it's House Resolution 25, and it removes the time limit. All these constitutional scholars have said you can add a time limit, Congress can remove it. We are removing the time limit, and we have met all of the requirements of Title V of the Constitution that says 2/3 vote in the House and the Senate, and 38 states have to ratify it. That happened in 2020. We were thrilled. And President Biden has sent a letter out to the nation that he will sign it and send it to the Constitution if we pass this resolution that is a sense of Congress that all of the requirements of Title V have been met and the time limit is removed.
Let me just repeat that because I think it's really crucial. Under the Constitution, you can amend the Constitution when both houses of Congress vote 2/3 in favor of the motion. Then it goes to the states, and you have to have 38 states ratify it. This amendment has been ratified by 38 states. 3 of them were after the time limit expired. Only 3. Some states have tried to rescind their ratification, which honestly, as a lawyer, let me tell you, very few things in law are clear. But one thing is clear. You cannot rescind a ratification. Once you've ratified, you're done. So the rescissions mean nothing.
Right.
And the timeline, there's also another argument, which is that it was not in the text sent to the
Right, exactly.
states. And so therefore it never should have had any bearing on the date of ratification. And I believe it was the 14th Amendment that took 100 years to ratify or something. It may be wrong on the 14th.
There was another one. It was raising the pay of, it was called the Madison Amendment, to raise the pay of, couldn't raise the pay of a member of Congress in the same.
You're right.
That took 200 years. That took
it's the
27th.
That's the 27th Amendment. And
Exactly.
actually, if the ERA hadn't stalled, it would have been the 27th Amendment instead of hopefully becoming the 28th Amendment. You're right. That's what it was. So I think, I think we've made the case that it is time for this to become the part of the Constitution. I know that President Biden has been a strong supporter, and I would love for his legacy to be that he orders the archivist to publish it, or that he somehow is able to weigh in at the Congress so that they sign the joint resolution. But two things. One, is a joint resolution in this Congress at this time even remotely a possibility? Honestly, tell me the truth. What do you think?
Listen, I've passed so many bills that people say it's impossible. And my motto is, it is impossible until it's done. So if you believe in something, I passed one bill, the 9/11 Health and Compensation Bill. It's the only mandated health bill that ever was authored by an individual member of Congress. It took me 18 years to pass it. I never gave up, and I'd still be working on it if I hadn't passed it. So it's the right thing to do. It's critical for women to have their rights protected and not have everything that you and me and everybody else has worked on so hard to put advanced rights and opportunities for girls and women. And we need to get it protected and in the Constitution. You are really well versed on the law. You really are absolutely terrific. And,
well,
and the
you.
problem is that when President Biden was elected, I was absolutely thrilled. And the archivist was appointed by President Obama.
Yeah.
And when we passed it in Virginia, I met with him. He said he believed in the Equal Rights Amendment. He would recognize it as ratified. So once it passed, he comes to my office. I call him over to my office, and he said, "Well, I have to apologize. I wrote the president and Barr, the AG,
Yeah.
and they wrote back a 30-page memo that said you have a time limit, it's over." And so that's what he said. So when Biden got elected, I wrote him, remove that direction and put in your own. So he writes back to the nation and he says he supports the Equal Rights Amendment. He wants to see it, but according to the Constitution, he does not have the power to initiate and move an amendment. It has to come for Congress. And he then asked for a statement from Congress that it is ratified. We got to remember our founding fathers did not trust the king. So they've had everything initiated in Congress, all their spending bills, all legislation. The president can't legislate. He can ask, but he can't legislate.
Yeah.
We have to legislate in Congress. So that's what he said. So that's what I'm trying to do. And some people say he'll change his, but another aspect of it, which I think is very important as a lawyer, if in fact he did what everybody says, Joe, just do it, then he would be attacked for overstepping his power. But also it would go to the Supreme Court where it would be challenged. There's no question about it. Every constitutional scholar says it would be challenged. And this is not a court that is favorable to us, nor is it an administration that is favorable to it. So if it went to the court, then you would have the Trump administration arguing that it wasn't valid. That's what they already argued. And you would probably fail in the Supreme Court, which would send it back to the states. And I would argue we have a less friendly state landscape now than we had in 1973 when it passed. So, I mean, the last thing I want is to be sent back to the states. So that is a very dangerous, in my opinion, and damaging provision. And so there's a whole movement of people who want to beat up on Biden to send it to the Supreme Court when they should be beating up on the Republicans. They are the ones that stopped it in the first place, stopped it from being ratified with their 30-page misconceived and wrong memo. And they're the ones that are standing in the way, not President Biden, who was the author of the Violence Against Women Act. It was the first bill I ever worked on.
Yeah.
The first time I ever testified before the Senate was when he was the senator for the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee on CEDAW. He was a big proponent for paid leave for the birth of a child and paid for child care. We got it. My bill finally passed for federal employees. I would be working now on everybody if I was in Congress still, but he's been a partner. He's been an ally. He's not the enemy.
No, he isn't. He isn't. But you're referencing the Office of Legal Counsel memo that says no, which reflects Erwin Chemerinsky's memo that says exactly that it's really up to Congress to take this responsibility, citing some case law, and it makes sense. So really, maybe Biden could persuade Congress to do what you've been trying to do, the joint resolution. But let me ask you something, and don't laugh until I finish, and maybe take a second and reflect on this. Donald Trump has said that he's going to protect women, whether we like it or not, or whether we ask for it or want it. Okay, there's at least one way he could protect women. He could tell Congress to pass the joint resolution and to make the ERA the 28th Amendment to our Constitution. Is it outrageous to think that we could maybe change our attack and say, okay, instead of this being President Biden's legacy, let the first act of your presidency, Mr. Trump, be the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment? Is there any hope that we could persuade President-elect Donald Trump to do that?
I think you're absolutely right. And he did say he would protect women. There is no greater way, whether we liked it or not, there is no greater way than to protect women. And I think we should appeal to him that it should be one of his actions in his first 100 days to place women into the Constitution where they belong.
Yeah.
And, women have been there in every war, in every action of this country, with like-minded men, helping men, supporting them. And, there's only one museum, the one that I passed and authored, for women. All the rest of them are on men.
And yours is a fabulous museum. It's really wonderful. And President-elect Trump, hard for me to say, but dear sir, if you are listening, please, you could outdo President Obama, because his first act in Congress was to pass the Lilly Ledbetter Equal Pay Act. But you could outdo him. Don't you want to do that? Please. I'm asking, I'm begging. Let's make the Equal Rights Amendment part of our Constitution. Let's make women. And by the way, I was going to end with that, but I have to say, because you mentioned women have been part of fighting wars, women have been in combat for over 30 years. And now we have a SecDef nominee who says women have no place in combat. I was General Counsel of the Army when women were integrated into basic training and were integrated into the military academies. I oversaw the opening of a lot of military occupational specialties, job categories in the military were open to women based on their abilities, not based on their sex or gender. They were admitted to these things. If they could carry 100 pounds, they could be a radio operator. If they couldn't, then they wouldn't be. And so I don't see any reason. I mean, women, first of all, the military would be understaffed if it eliminates women from a lot of positions.
I agree.
So Hegseth is wrong.
Limit their opportunities in the military either.
There are so many. It's such a great career for so many people. I'm very appreciative of all service members and very proud of the women. I was able to get legislation passed that abolished the Women's Army Corps. And you might say, why would I want to do that? Well, because in the Women's Army Corps, there were only 2 slots for generals. In the regular Army, there are hundreds. By integrating women into the regular Army, women now are 3- and 4-star generals, and there are many of them, as opposed to the 2 that they used to have before the elimination of the WACs in the Carter administration. So
we have 5 women veterans elected to Congress, 3
yes.
on the Republican side, 2 on the Democrat. They are all outstanding. But I want to end this on your idea, which I think is excellent. So let's follow up on that. Maybe we should send a letter to President-elect asking him to make it the first action or an action of the first 100 days.
Let's work together to get on social media and any other platform that we have. Let's get that letter written and circulated, and let's inundate him. I've seen public support change things. When Nixon fired Archie Cox, my boss, the special prosecutor, public reaction in those days, it was bags of mail, these giant-sized canvas sacks, because there was no internet, there was no computers, or they were in their infancy anyway. And he knew that he couldn't survive because of public outrage at his action. And so he appointed a different special prosecutor and agreed to turn over the tapes, which was what the issue was. So public reaction does matter. And today we have the ability for you to easily online sign a letter and get it to President-elect Trump to make this part of his first 100 days.
And may
Thank
I
you.
add to it, for your listening public, to sign for ERA.org, our petition drive to push the Congress to act.
Let's post
thrilled with this. I am thrilled with the challenge that you have thrown out, and I am on it.
Well, let's post as part of the show notes to this show the link to signing for ERA now, and we will draft a letter that you think would be persuasive to the future president, and let's get this done. ERA now.
Now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carolyn. This has been a very exciting conversation. I am very grateful. Thank you. Thank you.